Senate Bill 97, election law, counting of properly cast ballots. Bill on third reading.
Maker of the motion is our good friend from Southern Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the chair rise for questions?
Certainly.
Thank you. I sent you all these questions ahead of time. Hopefully you had a chance to be able to answer them. Do voters have to sign the absentee ballot for it to be a legal ballot?
Well, first of all, the only thing I got was your amendment.
Oh, I sent it to you by email. Sorry.
Well, I did not get your questions, but
okay.
I'll make every effort to answer it.
Okay. Do I need to repeat it?
Yes, please.
Do voters have to sign the absentee ballot for it to be a legal ballot?
Yes.
Actually, they don't. All they have to do is put an X, and then the person who assists them in filling out the ballot fills out an affidavit.
And that's considered a signature also.
Well, true, but then an affidavit has to be with it with the person who filled it out.
That's correct, yeah.
At what point are deceased voters removed from...
Would you...
At what point are deceased voters removed from the voter registry in the state?
Okay. Once they receive notice from Social Security, they're generally removed from the Board of Elections.
Okay. I talked with my Board of Elections on this yesterday.
Right.
And I also found it in law. I think we're going to have a conflict in law if this bill gets passed and approved that I think we need to address. Election law statute 3-501 tells the boards of election a voter is no longer eligible in the state to be a voter because they are deceased. Yet we're not changing this part of the law. So I see that's going to be a conflict. So if we don't adjust that in the law, what are the boards of elections supposed to follow?
Well, when they cast the ballot, that in itself generally qualifies that they are still alive.
Well, I understand that, sir, but once the person is deceased, our law says they are no longer an eligible voter. And that is under statute 3-501.
Mr. Speaker, there's so much noise I can't hear.
And that is under statute 3-501.
Yeah. Under
election law. So if this bill is passed and approved by the governor, we now have a conflict in the law. So which part of the law is the Board of Elections supposed to follow?
There really isn't any conflict. We see, a lot of times when we talk about this bill, the local boards have gone through over and over again and looked for all the fraud that every time we have an election, it comes up. There was fraud here and the fraud. They just haven't found that fraud. That keeps coming up every time. Now, generally, when we look at this bill also, we should know that if we don't allow people to vote, it could very well disfranchise those individuals. And
this isn't about people not being allowed to vote. This is about the vote being counted after they are no longer an eligible voter in the state of Maryland, according to election law statute 3-501.
It only applies to legally casted votes. If it's not a legally casted vote, then it won't be.
So my concern, and that's why I'm offering an amendment, is that some people could go in.
This is on third reading. Okay, and you
yes,
have an
sir,
amendment?
It's a Senate bill, correct?
You have an amendment?
Yes, sir, I do. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My concern is that this opens up for fraud in a large way, because we know people are in the hospitals. They can sign an X to the ballot, and then the person fills out the affidavit that says they assisted in voting. So, all my amendment, Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk.
Amendment.
Well, just to make a point, if you go and vote, and you go to your car, and you die in your car, your vote will still be counted.
Let me just say this. Let's offer the amendment first, so the body can have an opportunity to look at the amendment that is before us. The gentlelady from Southern Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The amendment number is 803726.
Amendment number 1.
Be so moved the reading of the amendment.
So ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Basically, what this bill or what this amendment does, will put a qualifier on the bill that says that if the ballot is cast, but the ballot is an absentee ballot that was postmarked after the death of the voter. So if the absentee ballot comes in after the death of the voter and is postmarked after the death of the voter, it is no longer a valid ballot.
Well, I would ask you to resist that amendment. One of the things that I have found, you could take a situation where somebody votes by absentee ballot, they could leave it on their desk for 3 days, could be mailed by their child, that vote would still be entitled to be used and counted. So it's still a properly casted ballot. If there is a problem with fraud, we could always refer it to the state prosecutor. The state prosecutor has the power and the authority to investigate and prosecute where needed.
But with the conflict in the law, or if this bill passes and we have
We
conflict
see-
in the law, which is the state prosecutor
We see
supposed
no
to follow?
conflict with this law at all. We're only talking about properly casted ballots. We see no conflict. We've looked at it. The subcommittee looked at it. We saw no conflict in the law.
Move the amendment.
Mr. Speaker.
On the amendment,
Mr. Speaker.
is there any debate on the amendment?
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
The gentlelady from Frederick.
Mr. Speaker, if I could provide some clarity, there's two issues that I hope that the body will listen to. First of all, last year, as part of the last year's General Assembly, we passed a law tightening up the issue with the dead voters. And that was a wonderful law that passed in a bipartisan fashion. Dead voters are removed much faster than they were in the past. We received from Social Security a notice. There is only required the Board of Elections to send one mailer to that family. If they do not get a response, those deceased voters are removed. The other issue with this bill that I hope the body will consider is that part of the problem with our laws as they are is that our men and women in armed services that had died in action were arriving in a casket before their ballots. And I don't know about you, but I think that their votes matter. This is the only part of our law where deceased voters, where their votes are not counted. And this is an important law. I realize that sometimes there can be fraud. Fraud is very rare. If someone wants to commit fraud, they can commit fraud on any level, whether they're early voting, whether they're voting on Election Day, or whether they're absentee ballot voting. This bill passed unanimously through our committee, and I would ask your favorable vote for this bill.
Can we ask the gentlelady, or are you opposed or for the amendment? We're on the amendment.
On the amendment, I am not in favor of the amendment, respectfully to my colleague.
Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from
And just to follow up on the good lady's comments, you have to remember for our overseas ballots, for our military personnel, not only are the bodies getting home before the votes, but those votes are being warehoused somewhere, and many times they are postmarked long after and sent back. The overseas military ballots are the very last vote that are counted. And this is a good bill. It is being introduced across the country for the reasons that have just been discussed here. We have a rule in this body, and you'll hear it, especially the freshmen, a card laid is a card played. And these votes should definitely count. And can you imagine the problems if someone lost an election by just 1 or 2 votes, and then you demanded that every single absentee ballot was checked to see if that person was still alive after that date or dead? I mean, it really creates a problem. I understand the good lady's concerns. I think they're unfounded, and I will not support the amendment. I will support the bill. Thank you.
the gentleman from Baltimore County.
I'd like to add a little bit of bipartisanship to the opposition to this amendment. We can't show a clear example of fraud, or nobody has been, at least on the floor today. I can show you two examples of how this has affected two Marylanders in the past. In 2004, I found myself living out of a dam in Haditha in Iraq, and in October, I cast my ballot along with two other Marylanders who did not survive November. Their votes would not have counted by the time they were counted in December. Mine counted, but theirs did not. That is an example of how this will affect Marylanders, has affected them in the past, and this is shoring up current law and making sure that no one who cast their last measure of devotion for our country, their vote will be counted, and we will respect that vote. Thank you. I vote, please do not support this amendment.
Gentlelady, maker of the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to all those who spoke on the floor, I understand the emotion behind this amendment. As a veteran myself, having been overseas, voting when I was overseas, I understand it. My concern here is about fraud and what this bill will open up. In the 45 days or more prior to the election, someone can fill out an absentee ballot on behalf of the deceased, thus committing voter fraud. In close elections, this kind of thing can matter. Like, if you were elected by 76 votes, we should have a provision in the bill to allow for checking for the possibility of fraud, that this does not impact elections. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
On the amendment, all in favor of the amendment say aye. All opposed say nay. No. Amendment fails. Any other amendments to the bill or to its title? Hearing none. It's on third reading for final passage. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Speaker.
Has everyone recorded their vote? Would anyone like to change their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. Having 134 votes in the affirmative, 1 in the negative, Senate Bill 97 receiving constitutional majority is declared passed.